multidimensional concept, right? We look at standards, inequality. Then in the afternoon session, we covered poverty. Yesterday, we were still in the single dimensional concept context, and then we were looking at how to assess poverty when we have ordered categorical or ordinal variables, right? So from today onwards, we are moving slowly towards multidimensional analysis. So when we have multiple dimensions, what are the different concepts? What are the differences conceptually? What we should keep in mind, and also let's first talk about the motivation for multidimensional analysis. So as we were discussing just a while ago about consumption expenditure. Consumption expenditure can be seen, as Amartya wrote in one of his articles, it can be seen as an indirect measure of poverty or well-being. Because what we are doing, we are trying to understand what people are accessing. And from that, we are trying to infer, probably they're well off. Many things can be missing in the middle. Let's talk about that. Why just having access to resources may not translate to well-being. Yeah, or people being better off. Okay, so the main textbook for this particular lecture is this book. Just to show you, I'm not connected to internet at this moment, but this book is available for free from our website. It's called multidimensionalpoverty.org. All the chapters are available for free. Okay? So I will show you. I will show one chapter, but then all of them are downloadable. And then we recently, with my colleague Mariana Santos, we wrote a brief chapter on measurement and analysis of multidimensional poverty. It is going to be published soon at some point. It is led by IIT Kanpur, actually, this book chapter. It's a chapter in the book, which will be led by some researchers from there. Anyway, so welcome to read the chapter, and there it's not just about the chapter, but within that chapter, these chapters, you have loads of references. Yeah, so they may be useful for you, but if you need further references from those references, you can always ask us. Okay, so why do we need to go beyond single monetary indicator? This particular report, have any of you read this report ever? Anyone? Have you heard about this report? Any of you know? Okay, so have you heard about the financial crisis in 2008-10, right? Yeah. Good. So when the financial crisis happened, many country governments, many leaders, they were quite unhappy. Why economists could not forecast that we were getting this recession? Because we have so many top economists sitting around the world. So the former president of France, Nicolas Sarkozy, said, okay, I'm going to set up a commission to explore, because we were so much dependent on GDP and per capita GDP, right? As if that's all everything, yeah. So the former French president said, okay, we are going to set up a commission. And he appointed Joseph Stiglitz, Nobel laureate, Amartya Sen, Nobel laureate, and Jean-Paul Fitoussi, who was the minister at that point of time. And there are many people who are engaged or involved in that report. So they were given the task to look at the problems with the current set of measurement and to come up with some suggestions what we should do. Yeah. So they, for example, suggested a multidimensional definition has to be used when you define well-being. We cannot just use GDP. Yeah. And they listed these 8 dimensions, but there are at least 8 dimensions. But these 8 dimensions must be considered. So if you look at them, material living standard, definitely important. You could look at per capita consumption expenditure, but then besides, you need to look at health. Those of you working here in health, be very pleased. There you go. Education, personal activities, so that people can do by themselves. Political voice and governance. Social connections, social network, relations. You see, often we cannot measure them, In our typical data sets, we don't define a lot of variables on them, but they're important. Yeah. Environment, insecurity, both economic and physical. Yeah. So that was the suggestion in their 2009 report. Now, how many of you have used almost all of them? I know you have in your research, you have considered education, health, material, standard of living. What about the rest? Have any of you used? Yeah. You have used environment. Anything else? Voice and governance. Okay. Anything else?
But with respect to household, I'm little bit like curious to know how to handle this political voice and governance. Like in one area, one sarpanch might be, or one ward member, like that kind of things in the household.
Possible. No, we are not. I have not gone and say all of them are at the household level.
And in everyday
So, community healthcare can be household level, as well as the community level, as well as at the state level. Yeah. Now, if you look at political voice and governance, yes, you are right. You can go at the sarpanch level very much because we talk about democracy, but democracy needs to be decentralized in that way. It has to go farther down. Yeah. Now, there probably you will not see at the household level, but there are indicators in IHDS, for example. They ask people in the household, can you speak in the community? Do you think your voice is heard in the community? And so on. So you can capture those. You can ask people. If you hear most of the people, based on whether they belong to a particular community, they are saying, no, our voice is not heard. Even in the service, oops, this is a concern. Of course, it can be captured. I would not say not completely, but it definitely can be asked to people in the survey. Do you think your voice is heard? Yeah. You.
what we say, data source.
Yesterday, yeah, so Indian Human Development Survey. So IGS is Pratap was referring to yesterday, isn't it?
In personal activities, what kind of component will it be? Is understandable, but
Personal activities, you have to go that I suggest that you go to the report because I cannot summarize all of the personal activities that they were saying, but people should have their hobbies. People should be able to enjoy their leisure time. They should have some activities, yeah. So time use data, remember? Yesterday Pratap was also talking about time use data. Leisure should be an important activity. When we develop say poverty measures, well-being measures, we hardly include leisure as if still we all see, that's a waste of time. You should work. No, leisure has its importance. So personal activities, whatever you choose to do, they should be important for your well-being. Yeah, if you want to go and play tennis. Yesterday I put up, we spent a little bit of table tennis in the evening, got really tired, it was very hot. But anyway, you should be able to have time for your personal activity. However you use it, it's kind of related to your freedom as well. Yeah, so these are the dimensions that they suggested should be important for broad dimensions. And all these dimensions you see, they may vary from country to country. Uh, Freedom, political voice, here, I mean, in personal activities, you may include religious activity as well. For some people, it may be important. I remember somebody in Malaysia, when they were developing their poverty index, also in GNH in Bhutan, they have some religious dimensions as well, whether you can practice, you have the freedom to do so. It's preference, yeah, depending on people's preference. So whatever activities people should be able to choose now, that can differ from society to society.
So it is leisure activities. I mean, what they are doing in their leisure time?
Mostly, it's again your religious activity. Do you consider it as leisure or something else? That I cannot say. It has to be defined at the society level. Look, this is the beauty of it is of sense work is that he never suggests that something should be dictated. So I should dictate you what your leisure or what your activity should be. You should be able to choose it. But if you have reason to value that that activity is important, you should have space for it. That's the basic idea. We should have the parks, we should have the sports center so that people can understand it.
It could be a community connecting.
Of course, absolutely, absolutely. But they are important. For your well-being, definitely they are important. To be able to go spend some time with your friends and so on, they should be allowed. Our employer should not just say, oh, you have to work for 17 hours. This is how it should not work, right? So that is an important component for your well-being as well.
This material living standards.
Yeah.
It's subjective and living standards.
How do you define it?
It's like this is a good standard for me, maybe not a good standard in another
Possible, possible. So that depends on the culture. So that aspect has to be there. Yeah, so material living standard will be defined, but then sometimes some people, even within the same community, if you are doing something, some people may say it is extravagant, it is exaggerated, it is not required, it's too much. But there will always be some subjectivity, and that's why we have a democracy. That's why we vote. That's why we, majority. Whenever there is a majority rule, we cannot say it is majority decision, not my country. I cannot say that. Whatever decision is made altogether, it's my decision as well. Even though my voice did not win the vote, majority. Yeah. Yeah.
It is very idealistic, but I am just curious because I haven't read the paper. So how?
It is not paper. It's a big report.
It's a report.
Yeah. So I welcome you to read the report. It clearly shows where GDP may fail. What are the problems with GDP? A good example that they give. Suppose you are caught in traffic. Yeah. So you are burning your gas, right? Burning your petrol. That means you will more frequently visit the petrol station, right? That means you will be spending on petrol, right? That is adding to the GDP. You are having growth, but is it affecting? Is it positively affecting your mental well-being in that traffic per hour? No. So GDP is good for accounting purposes. Is it necessarily increasing your well-being? That's the idea. Make sense? Yeah. Look, I mean, they have to keep it general because it's a report. They cannot go to each and every country and try to understand. These are the general things. But indicators, what indicators you will choose? Education, for example, a country like Malawi will have a different focus versus a Scandinavian countries, which will still have to focus on education, but the focus will be different because needs are different in their countries. But the focus will be on education in general. Yeah. Now, if you look at the first Human Development Report, have you heard about the Human Development Report? Yeah. So it was published in 1990, and of course, it was motivated quite a lot by Amartya Sen's capability approach. Mehboob ul Haq was the person who was sort of the creator of this report, Human Development Report. So it talked about a process of enlarging people's choices, and it talked about three main choices to be critical. To lead a long and healthy life, to be educated, to enjoy a decent standard of living. Yeah, they thought these three choices are crucial, and based on which the dimensions and indicators were chosen. Yeah, so they had life expectancy rates for the first one. For the second one, they had two indicators initially. Literacy rate, enrollment rate, which has been changed in 2010 to mean years of schooling, expected years of schooling. Then they went to a decent standard of living. They had per capita GDP, which has been changed to per capita GNI recently. Yeah, they have also gone through methodological changes. But these three were used to construct the Human Development Index. You have heard about Human Development Index? Use them. Okay. How good the Human Development Index is? Do you like the Human Development Index? Okay. Any problem that you think doesn't capture?
It doesn't capture inequality, for which we have an inequality adjusted HDI.
Okay.
Then there is environmentally sustainable indicators, which is again captured, recently introduced HDI adjusted for planetary boundaries. We have adjusted HDI, which later on Human Development Report came after. I think after 2010 they started correcting all the HDI.
Yeah, good. So HDI is one of the crudest of all indicators. Very crude. So when HDI was introduced, there was a series of 200 papers written on what are the limitations of HDI. It doesn't capture inequality. It doesn't capture many other dimensions of human development. The weight that has been used has been criticized, quite a lot. Despite all these criticisms, it served the political purpose excellently. Up until 1990, the focus was on economic growth. People are talking about physical capital, labor. Then came after Mankiw and others, human capital. No one was talking about human development, as if don't worry about that. This is not part of economics. Human Development Index, when it came up, today you go to Wikipedia and open a country, you will see the population of the country, per capita GDP, and all these other things, and you will see the HDI is reported as well. And if the country gets the rank, first rank in HDI or whatever, you will see it is reported in their top newspaper. Oh, for 10 years in a row, we are in the top 5. 10 years in a row, we are the first. Very crude, but it served its purpose. HDI, because entire focus was on GDP, it shifted the focus on education and health as well. So with this, its purpose, it served its political purpose very well across the world, despite being very crude. So that's the issue is that sometimes things don't have to be perfect to make a change. Even simple thing, if communicated properly, can bring drastic change. Yeah. Since HDI, so many other composite indices have been created. But I think no one has taken HDI in its proper and used to this. Yeah. Okay. Now, although they use these choices, they also mentioned these other choices in our human development reports about political freedom, guaranteeing human rights, self-respect. Often they are not captured in service. Most of the consumer expenditure survey or health surveys you see, they are not often, you do not get data on this list of them. Some, they will capture some. If you look at the demographic health survey, which is NFHS in the Indian context, you will see they have question asked to women, can you do a lot of things by yourself? Do you need permission? Do you need permission to go to market? Do you need permission to go to doctor? They try to capture a lot of things. The question asked such as, if husband beats wife, do you think it's justified? Surprisingly, even in the newest human development service, you see women justifying husband beating them. And it's so surprising. It's strange. Sometimes it is just ingrained in culture. Okay. So, anyways, we are not going to particular indicators and so on, but you see that these additional choices include these other aspects as well. Okay, they are included. Now, the first two slides were about well-being and human development. Now, poverty is generally a shortfall, the other side of the coin. Yeah, poverty is a lack of something if you don't have. Yeah, so that's where the focus axiom kicks in. Whether it is single dimensional, whether it's cardinal variable, ordinal variable, multidimensional framework, focus kicks in, because if you are talking about deprivation, you look at what people do not have, you completely ignore when people have something. Yeah. Now, multidimensionality of poverty has been seen starting from, of course, SAIL has argued quite a lot in terms of capability deprivations. Deepa Narayan's report on Voices of the Poor. Have you anyone read the Voices of the Poor? Heard about it? The Voices of the Poor? So it's again an excellent read. So this report produced by the World Bank literally goes to places and asks the people, poor people, about what you think about poverty. I don't think many reports would do that. Asking the people, what do you think is more important in your life? Some people may choose, having a job. Some people choose shelter. Some people who choose access to health and so on. Not necessarily everybody chose income, unfortunately. And that was the purpose of the report. Not everybody said, oh, if I just had the money to solve everything. they had self-respect, dignity, and all these things came out in that report. Again, it's a wonderful report to read if you are working in the area of poverty. Yeah. These are not academic articles, the one as I mentioned, the Sarkozy Commission report or Voices of the Poor. They're not academic paper articles, but they're beautifully written reports, long reports. Then one of the first multidimensional poverty measure was created by, proposed by Gugnia and Chakraborty. Okay, although we know Alcar Foster today because it is mostly used, but one of the first counting-based multidimensional poverty measure was proposed by Gugnia and Chakraborty in 2003. Again, it's a very good paper for you to read. Yeah. Then Human Development Report introduced the multidimensional poverty index along with Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative. They worked together to create these MPI. Now, remember, MPI is a point term for the UNDP and HOPE. Your purpose, you can give whatever name you can give. You do not have to call it MPI because most of the time you will not be using the same set of indicators. So it is not MPI. You can give it a different name, multidimensional index of poverty, or whatever you come up with. Yeah, but you don't necessarily have to give MPI because it is 0.5, then it's a completely different thing. Yeah, a particular set of indicators. Then, of course, Alcar and Foster, although paper was published in 2011, they produced the working paper in 2007. Yeah, so it's much earlier. And then Alcar Santos. So Alcar and Foster did not create MPI. Alcar and Foster, and people always get confused, and I see in many articles I refer to, Alcar Foster created MPI. Alcar Foster did not create MPI. They created the methodological framework. Do you have a question? Sorry? They created the measure, which is the counting-based measure that has different names. The counting one is adjusted headcount ratio, adjusted poverty gap, adjusted square poverty gap, and so we'll talk about it tomorrow. Yeah, but they did not create MPI. The MPI was created by Alcar and Santos in 2010. MPI is just one particular billions of possible measures. MPI is just one particular one which uses a particular set of weights, particular set of dimensions, particular set of indicators. That's called MPI. So Alcar and Foster did not create MPI. They just created the methodology. Yeah, that methodology is one adaptation, one of the many million adaptation is the MPI. Okay, which was created by Alcar and Santos and called active poverty, measure of active poverty or something like that. Yeah, we have these different terms at different point of time. To point, World Bank, you know what World Bank calls their dollar what 2.15 a day? Dollar 2.15 a day. What do they call? They have a name for that. Those were identified by dollar 1. They have a name. They call them extreme poor. Okay, so they have the term extreme poor. OFI used the word acute poor. Yeah, they are severely poor, and also there are different terms that people use. So sometimes when you are working on poverty, it is just be mindful about these different terms, because when you are writing them, journals catch them. Oh, you are saying extreme poor, but now extreme poor is used by the World Bank actually. Yeah? So just to be careful about some of these terms. Okay. Then also, if you look at the target 2 of the sustainable goal, it also talks about reducing poverty in all its dimensions according to national definitions. But this is for SDG. What we will have after 2030, we don't know yet. In MDG, it only had the target of reducing or halving the proportion of extreme poor. That means $1 a day. We just changed now. Now it became 1.25 a day, 1.9 a day. Now it is 2.15 a day. Yeah. So target 1 of Sustainable Development Goal is about reducing or halving, making it half the proportion of people, half the number of extreme poor defined by the World Bank. And then the second one is reducing poverty in all its dimensions by national definition. Here's a catch. I wanted to point that out. You know, whenever they define these goals, they say having the, or making it half, having the proportion of poor people. And there is a catch. Population is growing in many poor countries very fast, in African countries. So although they reduce the poverty rate, the actual number of poor keep on growing. So they never set the target of having the number of poor people by half. They will always say having the proportion of poor people. That's an easier target to achieve rather than reducing the number of poor people. Because with population growth, number of poor people goes up. So if you look at some of the graphs, I don't have them here, the number of poor people that you are expected to have, say, by 2050, you will see in sub-Saharan Africa, the number of poor people is going up, although the poverty rate is going down. Okay, and that's a political process. Somehow they do not want to feed a lot of pressure on the government by setting a target of reducing the number of poor people. They always say reducing the proportion of poor people. So just changing the term in layman's mind, oh, they're doing a good job. But in the background, you as a researcher should check all of them, not just. That's why you need to compare and check all of these measures. You just should not focus on one, because one measure cannot capture everything. Proportion going down, actual number going up. Okay, poor people, they are saying we are not seeing much changes in our life. We are saying, say, 1 million poor people, we are now 1.5 million, but the government is saying poverty rate has gone down. Yeah.
Can we say like we're not focusing on the absolute change,
Yeah.
we're like doing qualitative relative changes.
It is in what?
Like we are showing that we are growing in different dimensions, whether it is in poverty or development, or we're saying about less inequality, the improvement we're seeing of different dimensions by changing our measurements, or we're taking different techniques or the tools, or we can say the manipulation of the measurements so that we can show that we have achieved our target. Is it so or something like?
Suppose you are feeling dizzy, or suppose I am feeling dizzy. What will the doctor check? Just my heart rate, that's it, nothing else. Doctor will run different kind of checks to find out the problem, right? Because one indicator, just checking my heart or just checking my blood pressure is not going to reveal what the problem is. So the doctor has to run 10, 20 checks, right? Different checks, and then look if everything is right or where the problem is. Here, when the country is having an issue, the country is developing fine, but you need to check whether the country is performing well from different point of view, not just one particular indicator. So you look at inequality, yeah. You look at joint distribution, we talk about that. Okay. We will look at well-being. Fine, we will look at GDP, fine, but we have to look at other indicators. Let me show you some of the examples how it comes. Yeah.
Actually, why this curious query is coming to my mind?
Yeah.
I'm relating these things. Now it's not about Africa. If we want to focus on the Indian economy,
Yeah.
now we are the largest like populated country in the world.
Yes.
At the same time, what is happening is that we are showing our growth rate is high compared to the rest of the world, many of the countries. But simultaneously, our absolute poverty has also not gone that much as the case expected.
Give me 10 minutes. Let me show you some data and see if I sort of answer what you were already asked. Yeah. So let me proceed for 10-15 minutes, and I'm expecting that I will catch your attention. Exactly what you were asking. Yeah. Let's try to do that. If not, just we'll pause at that point of time and we'll have further discussion. Is that okay? I'm not again running away from your question, but let me come back to it. Yeah. Okay. So the motivations for using going beyond single monetary aspect, we can have two different kind of motivation. We can divide them into two different kind of motivations broadly. One, conceptual motivation. Second, empirical motivation. That is where I will try to answer to your questions. Yeah. Good. Okay. So the conceptual motivation, although I'm an economist by training, but I don't think I'm, bold enough just to say, economists have motivated. No, this motivation for using these multidimensional aspects comes from philosophical motivation, sociological, economic, anthropological. Different fields can justify. Poverty is multidimensional, multidisciplinary. No one field can just claim the ownership of poverty. We are the one we analyze poverty. No, many field studies, and we borrow our knowledge from many fields. Yeah. And the empirical motivation mainly is drawn because of the lack of strong association between monetary indicators as well as other important aspects of well-being. Okay, we'll come to that, and then we'll discuss a bit more. Let me check. I get carried away with time, and then in the last 5 minutes, I have to cover 20 minutes of things. Yeah. Okay, half an hour. I'm on time, and Pratap is not there to monitor me. You guys, please monitor me. If I'm running too late, raise your hand and say you are just talking too much. Yeah, I'll be happy to just start it. Okay, so here are some of the conceptual motivations. Yeah, we will talk about capability approach a bit more. It is due to Amartya Sen. So you could argue the looking at multiple dimensions from that approach from the point of view of capability approach, human rights approach, because human rights approach will clearly state certain aspects are very crucial for human rights. Here I mentioned education, health, right to speech, political freedom, and so on. So you can take a rights-based approach. You can say, these are my rights, and you should look at them directly rather than just imagining I increase GDP and my political, right, education right, health rights, it is automatically fulfilled. It has not happened. History shows it hasn't happened. Yeah. Basic needs approach. Many of you mentioned on the first day when I asked, right? The basic needs. Latin America, it was very popular in Latin America in 1960s and 1970s. You need to fulfill the basic needs, whether it is shelter, sanitation, water, basic education, basic health service, and so on. Not just about GDP, because GDP may not translate. You need to have political will. Why not focus on these indicators separately and see if they are fulfilled or not? And then the anthropological participatory studies. We, academicians, policymakers sitting in our air-conditioned room should not just dictate and decide what poverty should be and how people's lives should be changed. Participatory approaches. Robert Chambers has done quite a lot of work. Deepanarayan's work that I mentioned is quite useful. To go and ask people, okay, we are doing these policies. Is it making any difference? To engage in dialogue. Okay? It is not just telling people what I have in my mind and you just listen to me. Also engaging in discussions. What I'm doing, is it making any difference in your life? Yeah. So these are different aspects actually. If you read this work, I have mentioned some of this literature, you will see that it naturally leads to looking at multiple indicators, multiple dimensions. Yeah, you can try to look at them separately or try to look at them together. We'll come to that, the methodological aspects, the conceptual aspects in next lecture later on in this lecture. But these are the kind of different approaches that lead to you to work on multiple dimensions at the same time, rather than trying to look at one dimension. Okay. So let's briefly talk about the capability approach. I'm not a capability theorist, by the way. Just don't assume I know everything about capability approach. But let's have a very quick, the basic idea of the capability approach and try to understand as an economist. If you ask somebody who is studying, who is not from economics background, you will get a very different idea of people. The way they teach is very different. The way we try to understand. But again, as long as you get the main point, that's what matters. Yeah. So it was developed by Amartya Sen as well as Martha Nussbaum, but they have their differences as well. And they have their followers as well. Okay, I like the Sen approach more because, okay, anyway, I'm not going to go too far why, but I'll just get carried away. Anyways, the key concepts here, number one is functioning. What is functioning? Is the achievements of things or state of being that people may have reason to value. These are called doings and things. Yeah. Some of the examples: could be being able to live long, being well nourished, being healthy, being literate, being well clothed, being mobile, being physically secure, being able to take part in life of community, being happy as a state of being. Yeah, they can all be treated as functioning. Question for you. Any other examples that I missed here? Of course, I cannot list all of them. Anything that you feel that you missed from the list that you have in mind?
Quality leisure.
Huh?
Quality leisure.
Quality having quality leisure.
Yeah.
Okay, being able to spend some time on quality leisure. Yes, why not? Sure. Yeah.
Financial access. Financial access.
We're talking about access. It is about being and being. It is not about having access to food. Being nutritious. Okay. You want to say something? Louder, please.
Social acceptability.
Being socially acceptable.
Yeah.
Yes. Being participate in the society. Yes, of course.
Decision making, like
Being able to make decisions for yourself. Yes, definitely.
freedom from violence.
Okay, freedom from violence. Being free from violence. Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Have been, yeah, well, sure, definitely. I mean, what kind of freedom you say that being able to make political decisions, being able to vote, that would probably be the best one.
Informed vote.
Look, informed vote, that's again itself a big field, a lot of what is going on. You are talking about the ability to understand. When you are talking about knowledge, that will also depend on various things, your education, your engagement. A person may have high level of education, but may not be that much interested. The cognitive ability to understand, it is not always the same. For example, compare an economist, a political scientist versus a chemist. I cannot say one is less educated than the other, but they have very different way of engagement towards society or political participation.
That is opinion, but having the knowledge, different people may have the same knowledge, but opinion may be different.
Oh, of course.
The knowledge should be there.
Absolutely agree. Sometimes we have the knowledge. So being able to either say, you could say, being able to participate in political decision making, being able to vote. I do not know. I mean, being the leader of the state, well, it is not possible for everybody, right? Although we want to be, it may not be possible. There are some exogenous factors. So we have to understand what is actually achievable from our point of view. These are the basic ones, but being able to vote, being able to be heard, politically heard, your voice, being able to speak freely, definitely, they're important.
Being
Anything
able
else?
to being able to live with dignity and honor.
Absolutely. Amen to that. Definitely. Yeah.
Environmental factors surrounding
Being able to breathe in pollution. No, but from individual point of view, what would you like to be in terms of environment? As I said, being able to breathe, in
Access to clean environment.
yeah, being able to but that's what it is. You are saying access. I can give you access, but would that? But
Supply is not there.
वो दिल्ली वालों को लगता है।
It's there.
no, but think of it. It's from your side. As I will say, so same gives the example here as well. Okay, having access to bike makes our life easy, right? So here, an able-bodied person has access to bike. Here is a heavily pregnant mother has access to bike. Is the access to bike same for both? So the functioning here is being mobile. But is the bike making them equally mobile? No, probably the pregnant mother who being mobile, you need different kind of access. You see the point? So it's not just about having clean, whether even if you have that clean environment and if you are a political prisoner and stuck inside house, what's the point? You have a clean environment outside. So it's about being able to do. So we have to be a bit careful. It's not just about access, it's just being, and whether you are able to fully be that. Yeah, so it's called function. Yeah.
So the energy security comes under kind of physical kind of capability functioning.
But what are you going to do with energy security? So you are saying being able to work at night, being able to boil my water in a kettle. Fine, that's fine. So whether you are being able to do something, it's not just having access to it. People can have television, you have access, but you have electricity. You are not being able to watch. You don't have the functioning, although you have access to it. That's the difference. Yeah. Okay.
So, it's quite controversial, but my attitude to that is opposite of being able to stay wrong. So a lot of countries that we see that are allowed to actively
Allow euthanasia. Okay, that is being able to choose in that country it is allowed.
For example, in India we see being able sort of driving without helmet. That is sort of, I mean,
Being able to drive without helmet.
yes.
That conflicts with some people's ability to be safe.
Yes,
It is contradictory, right?
It is contradictory. That's why I started with
So you are saying that some of the choices could be contradictory to each other. Somebody has the urge to kill, being able to kill, right? No, I'm giving an example. I'm giving an extreme example. That could be some people may value, but then that will be conflicting with the social. That's another layer of discussion. Yeah, so we cannot. So you have to have reason to value, and that's quite important. Yeah.
But when we consider, let's say, I am driving without helmet,
Euthanasia is very important. If you look at the old age, if you look at the well-being of elderly, yeah, that's when this becomes prominent. Because if somebody has a particular disease and that person can choose to die, and that's a big debate in Europe at this moment. In European courts and all these things, it's very important. I cannot ignore that. Yeah. Being able to drive without a seatbelt and ride without a helmet, I have to be really cautious because it is conflicting my own right to be healthy and others' right to be healthy. So we have to have a big debate. Again, I'm not going too far on it. That is not a capability approach class, but that's something we have to be very careful. I asked yesterday somebody, where is your helmet? They said that I don't need one. Well, I am doubtful. I mean, I would never drive without my seatbelt. Because I'm not going to endanger my own life.
but it could be a choice. I mean, most people
Look, choice, you can have a choice to disobey the law. Because suppose you go to, for example, if you go to some Middle Eastern countries, you have to dress a certain way. It is ingrained in their culture. I cannot come from Western country. Somebody say, I am going to disobey that because I do not like it. It is not going to work. I will put in jail because I'm breaking the law. So you ought to be, that's why I said the capability also, it has to be shaped by the culture, ingrained in the culture. Yeah. So we have to be very careful that some capability you may justify, for example, women's rights. Some country may justify, oh, women and men, they do not sit in the same area, they do not have right. Those from some society's perspective, other society's perspective, can justify that's wrong. But maybe that society has it's a collective choice. So you have to also then take the decision of individualistic functioning versus collective choice. They may have conflict. Again, that's about philosophy. I'm not trying to go there, but you can have different discussions. But you can see, as you raised, a lot of noise came from different sides because there could be disagreement. Yeah.
उसको break करना is what freedom of
और
capability.
वही अमर्त्य सेन ने वही जो लिखा था डेवलपमेंट इज फ्रीडम में वही चीज
Yes, absolutely. So there will be a trade-off and there will be a boundary. Where we set the boundary, it will be decided by the democracy. Then you have to go for democratic. Now you can argue democratic principle is not always right. Completely agree. Yeah, we can have debate all day. But anyway, I'm moving on. Okay, is that okay?
How about the ownership of assets, holding the ownership?
I will come to that. Just give me 10 minutes. I will come to that. Yeah. I gave you the example of the bike and the pregnant mother. You can have ownership of assets, but that may not translate to functioning capability. So we have to be very careful. It's being something, not having something. Yeah, I'll come to that a bit more. Now, what is capability? Capability is the alternative combination of functions. So capability is a set, is a big set where it can have alternative functions altogether, different combination of functions. Yeah, this is called the freedom to achieve, or this is called the opportunity set. Again, I'm not going to inequality of opportunity. I know you wanted to ask. We can have a separate conversation because inequality of opportunity requires completely separate lecture. Yeah. And so you can also see it as a freedom to choose a life one has reason to value, whether that includes driving without seatbelt or helmet. Yeah. But again, we have to see whether this is conflicting with something. Yeah. And also you can see it as the ability to promote oneself. So let's try to look graphically what it means with a simple graph. Non-economist may not like my approach, okay, but this is how we are used to seeing things. Yeah. Now, poverty in capability world is seen, is understood as deprivation of capabilities, not being able to fulfill what you want to be. Yeah. Now, so this is according to Sen that economic growth cannot be sensibly treated as an end in itself, just like per capita income. Development has to be more concerned with enhancing the life we live and freedom we enjoy. Yeah, just to quote from Sen. So what matters fundamentally is not what the person has. This was your question, right? Having assets. Yeah. It is not just the things that person has, that is commodity consumed. That's the utilitarian approach. But it should be about what a person is or can be or does or can do using them. That's the more important thing. Yeah, I can have a lot of things, but then if I do not have the freedom to enjoy them, what's the point of having them? Yeah. So we need to think beyond the availability of commodities and consider uses to address functionings, what a person does with those commodities, given the characteristics they come in. Yeah, so that's the idea, basic idea of capability approach. That is where it moves beyond just access to commodity or access to resources. Okay, so this is just the conceptual. This is how we used to, right? We draw graphs in different curves, like we're in perfect world. But this gives us, it's good. It just gives us some sense, okay, of how things. Suppose we have this two functioning world. Yeah. Now, suppose this is how your capability set, opportunity set, freedom to choose from they look like. Something familiar? Have you seen in economics? What have you seen? What is it? Product possibility frontier, right? So you have all these resources, and this is given them how much you can produce. That depends on your preference, of course. And so this is production possibility frontier. And now you have your preference. You have all these choice you can be. Do you want to be an engineer? Do you want to be a doctor? Some of you probably had all these choices, but you selected something. You selected to study economics, and okay, this led to here. You did not choose to do medicine. Maybe it was not in your capability set, or maybe it was in your capability set, but you chose. Now, this is called achieved functioning. So, the data that you collect, when you go to the field and the data that you collect, right? People are doing this, what is your years of schooling and so on. This is what you collect. You collect data on this point only. So what we observe in the data, how many years of schooling you have achieved, what kind of sanitation facility you have and everything, all these data that you collect, they are mainly achieved functioning. You do not observe the capability sets. So now you are sitting here, you are doing PhD, some of you are already employed in an university. I observe that, but I do not observe anything like, could you become a doctor, but you did not take that choice, or that was outside of your capability set? We do not ask those questions. That would have been question about capability set. Now, Sen would always argue in a theoretical world, you should, so if you have increased people's capability set, of course, your achieved functioning will go up, right? This is how it's supposed to be. Now, Sen always suggests he prefers capability set over acute functioning. Because capability set, if you can measure ideal world, the capability set, that's the ideal thing. Then you are seeing to what choices people have. The problem is that in practice it's impossible. So we go for the second best alternative. We work with acute function. What is observed to us? Think about if I have to understand any one of you, and suppose I have to define your capability set. Imagine how difficult it would be. I have to go back to your birth, or even before your birth, because I have to understand your parent situation as well, your environment. I have to define everything to get an understanding of your capability set. I think 1% information will just take all my budget away for survey. Be impractical with big data and all these things. What will happen? Because these days, literally, a person is born, a person's picture and everything is available on the internet. Who knows? 30 years from now, people will be able to define capability set. Not now, not the time I grew up. But Sen prefers capability set. Yeah, and he has reason why he prefers capability set over. So this is larger. So Sen prefers capability set over acute functioning, and this is the example he gives always. The example of the difference between undernourished and fasting. A person can choose to remain really thin. Body mass index can be really low, but that person has done so by choice. Now, when you go and collect the BMI data, you will observe this person has a BMI of less than 18.5, and you will just identify them as deprived. You have no way of knowing if the person chose to be that of that health condition. There may be various reasons. One could be person want to go for modeling or whatever. Yeah. Or the person has a BMI less than 18.5 because the person could not have sufficient amount of food. So being nourished was out of the capability set. We do not know that difference. So Sen always prefers capability set, but honestly, I do not know how to define capability set. It could be a research paper, a long book on its own. You have a question?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, you were showing your fingers. Do you see the difference? Why in an ideal world, what somebody would prefer, Sen would prefer, and why we just get stuck with that function? Okay, question? Okay, now you may ask, should there be a list of central capabilities? What do you think? Should there be? There should be 5 or 7 capabilities that everybody has to follow, like a dictator. Huh? Okay. Okay, we'll come to that. Now, the question some of you ask, access to resources and so on, right? Why may resources may fail to enhance capability? So here are some of the reasons. There could be other reasons as well. Yeah. You have access to resources, you have your commodities, you have your assets and everything. Does it necessarily enhance capability? What may not work? Number one, personal opportunity. A person who is diabetic cannot live on the same meal. Even if you give, I'm diabetic by the way. So if you give me a lot of, I'm from Bengal as well, where we eat sweets and everything. So if somebody does give me that, of course I would love it. But it's not going to translate to nutrition for me. There you go. I have all the money, all the sweets in front of me. Oh, I cannot eat, I cannot use it for my purpose. See, a person, disabled person who has difficulty in walking, there's no point in giving a bike or a ladder. It's not going to, what's the use of that? So there could be many reasons because of personal heterogeneity. Having access to resources may not translate. If it translates and you justify that it is translating, I have checked everything, that's perfectly fine. But it may not. You have to be careful. Yeah. There could be environmental diversities. Yeah. I have lots of beautiful Punjabis, kurta and everything, and I'm living in a mountain full of ice. What's the use of those dresses to me? Yeah. Various in different social issues. Yeah, I can have different, for example, in the UK, just one example, in the UK, there was this big issue of particular car parts being stolen. So every time you buy that car, you change that car, within 7 days, they are stolen. Ultimately, some people decided, I don't want to have a car. Access to resources did not convert to you being mobile because your car parts being stolen every day. So the use of the car there to you. If the country cannot stop those kind of crime. Okay, again, it may not translate. There could be intra-household distribution issues where you have girl children, female children being discriminated against in many households, in many developing countries. So the family as a whole is well to do, but it is not channelized to be healthy, being nutritious for the girl child. Yeah. And you can have minimum social expectations. Again, I'm not going too far into details, but societal factors can also affect individual. There you go, helmet or seatbelts. Yeah, there are some societal factors, but then you could argue, I do not feel free. Okay, because I live in the society. Yeah. Okay, list of capabilities. There you go. Amartya Sen. Now you can imagine why I like the Sen approach more. No list of central capabilities. It should be determined by public dialogue and needs of the societies. Martinusbaum has list of 10 capabilities. I'm not listing them because I do not necessarily, there some of them are important, but I do not necessarily agree with all of them, but they are available in Wikipedia anyway. You search, 10 list of capabilities will come. This is what she thinks there has to be. This is where Sen and Martinusbaum mainly.
Sir, in this way, people can open that no list of capabilities. So, is it practical? I mean, what is the purpose of the theory then if there is?
Okay, if I give you the 10 things and you don't like them, what would you do?
It is not possible that everybody will like, but I think as a country,
But that is why you should keep it open. You come, you vote on your capabilities, and the majority decision will probably agree on 10 capabilities, which may not be in the list of Martha Nussbaum, but the country as a whole agrees. Why not?
She is probably talking about a tangible set of.
I know what he's talking about. I know very well, and I'm pushing on. Okay?
yes.
It may be important, I know, but it may not be. If you go to Afghanistan, they may devise 10 sets of capabilities that they should have, they would agree. You may not agree in here. Or the 10 capabilities that you agree here may not work in Japan. So why should we globally and universally have 10 list of 10 capabilities? Why do we have to? There may be some of them are important than the others. Education, health, we know. Some country probably more religious than the other. They will have religiousness in their capabilities. We may not agree. See the point? But I completely agree. Probably, even if you talk to different countries, probably there will be 5 or 7 capabilities out of those 10, definitely. But why?
Do not have any
Practical from whose point of view?
Is it implementable? I mean, if we have
Implementable by who? Implementable by who? There is not one policymaker. We have a central government, we have a state government. And the list of capabilities may be different. Why does a list of capabilities being able to speak in Hindi? I may choose not to speak in fluent Hindi. I may choose to speak in my regional language. I may not agree with the central government. I'm giving one example. I don't want to start a debate here. I'm just giving one example. So even the central government and state government may agree on different list of capabilities. Whose list of capabilities should I choose? As I'm saying, most of the time you will agree certain things, being healthy, being educated, almost everybody will agree. Even if I don't define it, it will come naturally. It is, the difference between having one child policy and not having one child policy. One child policy, the rule of dictatorship, it happened with a vibrant democracy. It never would have happened. It happened. Look at the result today. It's not that different. If you compare India and China, fertility rate is not that different. Why take something so drastic? Okay, China may have argued one-child policy work. India should have had. But India is just naturally progressing in the same way. So if you can naturally progress, why take that drastic action? Look, this is where we disagree. Again, I do not want to be the dictator. I just express my preference, why I value saying more, and I'm debating with you. I'm not saying if you feel that list of 10 or 12 capabilities are essential, I'm not going to come and tell you, no, you must not do that. It can be your preference, and you are allowed to have that. But what I'm trying to say that eventually, naturally, if our democracy decisions will lead to some capabilities, we should adapt to it, fine. But if we have disagreement, if Rajasthan have 10 different list of capabilities or 12 different list of capabilities than Bengal, than Kerala, so be it. That's what I'm trying to say. Would that be acceptable? Or again, I don't want to impose on you, but would that be acceptable?
So we have these sustainable development goals. I mean, these are like very
170 targets, awful, trust me.
targets, all good
Agree.
targets. Without
But you have to choose. You have to pick and choose a little bit. Yeah, they are there. They are just your health indicators. If you just say, okay, here is an example. Can you tell me there should not be more than 7 health tests? If I fall sick, there should not be more than 7 tests. Every doctor has to perform that 7 tests only. Can we do that? Not possible. So depending on what we have, the number of tests will change based on needs. And not the list of capabilities. Again, that's the argument. You will always have, there will be always a technical, theoretical aspect. There will always be implementability aspect. We have to find a middle ground all the time. That's the practical thing to do. But what I'm saying is that we not necessarily, Martin Usman exactly argued from that point of view. Now, unless I put these 10 list of capabilities, countries will not accept, but countries may have the option to disagree with a list of capabilities. Why do I have to accept all 10? That's what I'm trying to say. So it's a process. I know there is an infinite number of processes. Probably 15 of them are more important than the rest. Fine, let's reach with a democratic decision on that. Is that okay? Sorry, I mean, it's. I'm not disabling or I'm not trying to sort of impose on your thoughts. But this is how way I feel. I'm happy to engage in the debate. Yeah, this is how it should be. Yeah, does it make sense? Yeah.
As far as public dialogue is concerned, in
Yeah.
sense approach, because we are heterogeneous, then whatever capabilities we try to include in it will have some different opinion from some set of people. How do you defend that?
How do I defend? Why does
Or
it matter?
or how does Sen
In
defend it?
democratic decision,
Okay.
how do we reach a democratic decision? If suppose you can vote for A or B, if there is 51% vote on A will be implemented. What do you do when your decision is not implemented? Do you just say, I'm not going to follow this rule?
Of course, I'll have to follow.
You will follow, right? You will respectfully
But then
follow.
in
This
case-
is what we do as
In case you have more than 2 choices, then there could be dilemma, right? I mean, we can't.
dilemma everywhere. But what is that? The idea is that in social choice, you cannot just have everybody. That is what arrow is impossible.
And
you cannot accept all the choice. There will be disagreement.
And sir, in case of voting pattern, let's say, majority opinion doesn't necessarily mean that it is right in most of the
I
cases.
never said that. I never said
Then
that.
how does
But
that?
this is what if you say this is the fallacy of democracy, but so be it. If I have to choose between a dictatorship, okay, let's do a little vote. Dictatorship, democracy. How many of you would choose dictatorship? How many of you choose democracy? What is the answer? You see, I mean, ideally, I would also run. I would also like, okay, this is what I think, this has to be implemented. But if you do not agree, I cannot do that. That's the beauty of democracy, but democracy has its fallacy. You can choose Donald Trump, you can choose Boris Johnson, and so on. These are mistakes. But this is part of the democratic process. If you choose democracy, you have to accept those things and you have to learn to live with them.
I mean, is there any way to like kind of adjust or take into account the opinion of minorities in sense approach?
It should be. That is what Voices of the Poor is about. So 10 list of capabilities should not be decided by the Prime Minister and the Chief Minister. Ideally, they should be a political process. And you see our democratic process, it goes at the Gram Panchayat level, at the local level. It is not that everything is decided at the central level or the state level. If we have that process, what the local community needs, if you know that, so what you need in a village of Madhya Pradesh may not be relevant sitting in Delhi. So why not you focus on their capability? The capability should not be dictated by Delhi. This is the point, you see? So if they think that's important for them, for example, there is a need for developing a tribal related. So if you develop a tribal welfare measure, it will be very different from an urban welfare measure. Or if some of you who is doing rural multidimensional poverty, spoke to me. You did, yeah, there you go. So rural multidimensional poverty may not be the same as urban multidimensional poverty because the list of capabilities and functions could be different. That's what I'm trying to say. So you cannot say, I cannot come and say the global MPI has to be used all countries to make decisions, make policies. No, countries should have their Indian government develop their own MPI, which is different from, so that because they feel that some of the function is probably not included in global MPI. They are defining theirs. So we should have that freedom.
But then
nation development program should not come and say, this is global MPI, everybody has to follow.
But so then Indian government included that variable, that indicator, which has for them, like they find that they have more traction in that variable. The bank account holding, one of the indicators they have included in MPI calculation. This variable.
Now we are getting a bit distracted now, okay, with discussions. Very quickly before I move on, it's already we have 1 hour left. Yeah, go ahead.
So the NITI report that they have added 2 indicators that they have chosen the bank account living standard. That is the maximum, like they have achieved the maximum in that. So they have keep that so that they
agree.
So,
Agree. It was, you can argue it was not a democratic process because they added it just to show they have done maximum reduction. Agreed. That's not the right thing to do. But what I'm saying is that democracy works at different level. You can have a dictator called United Nations. Then you can have a dictator at the central government level. You can have a dictator at the state government level. Whichever way you do, some people always be unhappy with certain things. That's fine. Here it has been done at the NITI level, and you can argue that, look, I don't agree with it, write a paper and show. If I select these indicators, you have done really poorly. Poverty hasn't changed. It's fine. I'm moving on a bit now. We have done 30% in first 1 hour. We have 70% to go. Yeah. Okay. So, anyways, so main idea is that if you look, from a capability perspective, it will give you a very different type of policy rather than if you make your end as industrialization or GDP and so on. HDI, for example, influence a lot of policy. Yeah. Okay. Now, conceptual motivation is done. We move to empirical motivation. Yeah, we'll try to go a bit faster. Just show you some empirical data. I hope they will be useful for you. Yeah. So here is a graph for you. There's global trend. Yeah. Global trend in per capita GNI, global trend in infant mortality, life expectancy. You have a little bit of blip because of COVID, and then you have primary school enrollment rate. Now, just looking at these 4 figures, what would you think about the relationship between these 4 variables? High GNI goes with improved infant mortality rate, improved life expectancy, primary school enrollment rate, right? Okay. Here is another graph where in the first part, I just look at the 30-year period graph. In one part, I look at the change between the first period and the last period, change in GDP versus change in enrollment across countries, change in GDP, change in mortality rate across countries. You do not have that strong positive relationship. Okay? Necessarily doesn't mean that GDP and the other indicators, they're just exactly going on hand in hand in the same proportion. Here is also what we did. instead of looking at the 30-year period, you may say, oh, there could be up and down in the middle, you haven't considered. Fine. We look at the change for every 5 years. So 30-year period, I broke it down to first 5 years, second 5 year, and then so on. 6 5-year periods. Then look at the relationship. Again, you do not observe anything very positive. So even at the global level, at the macro level, at the cross-country level, this is lost. I have not even gone at the household level.
These are countries.
These are cross countries. Yeah, these are countries for just first period and last period, the change in between 30 years. Here, I broke it down into a 5-year period. Change over first 5 years, change over second 5 years, and so on. That's why you have more data. Yeah. Again, there is no positive, perfect fitting relationship. A lot of noise. This is coming from Sen's own work, we told. But what he did, he looked at presented GIAN per capita in 1994, and then plotted life expectancy with the black bar. Yeah, and you have the countries from around that time. So it is what I'm trying to say is that it's historically hold. It held in 1994. It is holding today. So you have Kerala. There you go. Yeah, our state. If you look at here, income-wise, very low. Look at the life expectancy rate, really high. China, Sri Lanka. You see, these are countries or regions with very low per capita GNI, very good performance in health. Then you have Namibia, Brazil, and then South Africa, Gabon. You go, they are improving in one indicator, but not necessarily the other indicator. Not necessarily higher per capita, even if you look at across countries.
Okay.
I showed you the data 30 years later, this is 30 year older. The same thing. 1994. Yeah. 1994 means the data from 1991, 1992. Yeah.
So the first one is Kerala. It's a small region and it's a state.
Yes.
Can we compare this and the other ones of the countries?
Yeah. Yeah, you can use any data and compare. You will find similar picture. I mean, the picture I showed you, it's for all countries, but you still did not see a positive relationship. So what I'm saying is that what I showed you with current data also held true 30 years ago. That situation has not changed. So the relationship between income and other indicators at all levels is not necessarily hunky-dory. One, do you have high income? That means everything is solved. That's the main point just wanted to say as empirical motivation. This is what you wanted to ask, right? Talking about GDP, what about others?
Absolute trends is not done.
Not yes, no. So this one again, you have main survival percentages. Again, same in the same article. This is a very beautiful article called from income inequality to economic inequality. Sen went to the United States to give a talk, and his talk, he proposed my talk should be economic inequality. And he said that when I entered the campus, everywhere it is written, my talk is on income inequality. So then he had to write a paper itself, what is the difference between income inequality and economic inequality. Economic inequality does not always mean income inequality. Income is a component. Economic inequality is much broader. Yeah. So here again, the picture shows you have the survival rate. What he did cleverly, he looked at the survival rate of the black population in the US, white population, and Indian China. So if you just look at white, probably you get different. But sorry, the United States as a whole will be different. But look, within United States, not necessarily the black population had better living standards even compared to people in Kerala or China at that point of time. So again, higher income may not translate for all groups. So access to resources may not benefit everybody equally. That's the point. Just the evidence, just to give you more evidence. Survival rate. Yeah. Here, another example for India and its neighbors. India, Bangladesh, and Nepal. And we have the data for 20 years between 1990 and 2011. Things may have changed slightly. You may have slightly different data if you have analyzed, but I'm just presenting the data I had in our books. So if you look at India already started in 1990 with higher per capita GNI. Make sense? And then if you look at the growth, it was also higher. So in absolute term, it was adding a lot more money per capita. But then you look at change in under 5 mortality rate. Okay, this is India's. Bangladesh, Nepal had much higher. Look, it became lower. If you look at metal non-mortality rate, again, they reduced it much faster. So if you look at some of these, you have only some indicators. You may have other indicators as well. Again, the point being, growth is not translating, having money, resources is not translating to improvement in other indicators, not necessary. Just giving you some empirical motivations. Yeah. Here is another example. This is the progress. This was based on the global monitoring report, where they monitor performance in Millennium Development Goals. Here, extreme poverty, world's extreme poverty, and at that point of time, it was defined at $1.25 a day. And this color shows how many countries, so these are country numbers, how many countries have made the target by then or made sufficient progress, because the Millennium Development Goal, the life of Millennium Development Goal was until 2015. And this report was 2013, towards the end of it, right? So how many countries? Now, if you look at extreme poverty targets, more than 16, around 65 countries made the target, which is good, right? But then, if you are reducing extreme poverty, other deprivation should be taken taken care of automatically. This is the expectation. You are driving people out of poverty. Well, how many countries made the target of improved water? Either made the target, made sufficient progress. Lower number, smaller number of countries. So if you go, infant mortality, sanitation, look, most countries did not make the target. So just solving monetary poverty, forget about growth. Even solving the problem of monetary poverty is not necessarily translating for the period. I bet if you try to come up with examples, we have not updated the data. If some of you are interested, you can try to update those data and try to see what you observe. Things are not going to be very different. Has changed, definitely, but good to have 170 SDG indicator so that you can plot now a longer graph or something like that and see whether you are making meeting the targets or not. Any questions now before I move on the technical aspects now? We may go over a bit. Pratap is not there, so this is the student, not mine. Yes.
Monitoring supplements are not translating to other developments, like other integrated development. What is the purpose of giving the caste incentives to different categories? Like I'm focusing on India because I don't have.
Are you talking about cash transfers?
Yes, because we have like senior this old age allowances and all these things. And in that case, how can we assume that old age allowances are giving in the cash format or like 1,000 1 month or something like that? That will also improve their health condition and other things, right? This is just an example, and there are different allowances there.
You have to keep in mind what we are talking here is that income is not sufficient. Do you know the difference between sufficiency and necessity? Sufficiency means A implies B. A is sufficient for B. Yeah. Necessary means not A implies not. Yeah. If you do not have money, you cannot do anything that you wanted to do. So money is necessary. No, I'm not going to debate on that. Money is important means, but it is not an end. So what we're trying to show here, we are not saying just give up the monetary poverty at all. Don't look at consumption expenditure. We are not saying that. That has its importance. So that's why giving, and another thing you have to keep in mind, money is fungible. Fungible means you can decide, I'm giving you money, but you can decide where to spend. Sometimes if I give you a particular thing, if I give you a TV, if I give you a phone, and if you do not need it, you will not go. So giving money is giving people the choice. They can select where to spend. But if you just give money to people, cash transfer, That does not mean you are not going to build a health center. You are, say, for example, cash transfer programs. Yes, they have made a difference in people's lives, but why they fail? They fail when the supply side does not work with them. You can give the money to people, but if you have not built a health center, why would they go to check up? Because in condition of cash transfer, you impose a condition that if you take your children or pregnant mother for regular health checkup, then you get the money. Fine. But if you do not have the health center, where would they go? Mexican example. It is observed from the study, they have something called oportunidades, the big cash transfer program. Whenever a female child's family from their house, the school distance is large, cash transfer did not provide any incentive for the child to go to the school because of safety and other issues. So, lesson here is that besides income, in addition to income or reduction of monetary poverty, you have to pay separate attention to these other places. Spillover doesn't work. If you just assume I just give growth, I just reduce income poverty, and it just spill over to other indicators, that does not happen. But giving money to girl children for their education or elderly pension and so on, they have their use. But just giving them is not going to solve all the problem. That's what is more important. That's the lesson from here. Does it make sense?
Yes.
Any other questions before we move on?
Sir, I think there will be this bottleneck also because an economy which is growing and if it has this kind of infrastructure and bottlenecks, it cannot keep on growing. There will be this bottleneck and cannot.
Yeah, that's why you need to focus on them. That's why I said that for us economists, if you look at the poverty, it's a loss of opportunity for us. It is very important. Otherwise, it will be bottleneck. It will, at some point, we will stop. Yeah, that's the idea.
So there is you often talk about the bottom people who are living in poverty that we identify as low poverty.
Could you please be louder? Sorry.
So in India, we identify the households of the people who are living in the poverty, that is BPL, and there are some special transfers, cash or in kind, made to them. But we sort of want to avoid the middle section. So as I have observed in the field, that for example, a person who is not poor, who is not BPL in terms of monetary poverty. But
now, BPL is not just monetary poverty. BPL methodology has been revised so many times. We even wrote a paper on that. Yep.
yes,
Kerala, for example, follow its own BPL identification. Right? So the idea is that what you are trying to say is that if I understand from your question that yes, we only target those who are BPL, but even the 10% those who are above the BPL is not necessarily, they are still vulnerable.
yes,
Why don't we target them?
yes,
Absolutely.
yes. But the point is, a lot of schemes target such beneficiaries, quote unquote, that are identified by the gram panchayats, and some transfers are made to them. For example, Ayushman Bharat has certain criteria. If the person qualifies that criteria, then only he gets the card or the benefit. But the other person who may not be necessarily qualifying that criteria and only on subsistence level might not avail that benefit. That leads to the poverty, the health poverty. So, I mean,
way out would be to relax your poverty line, relax the criteria. That is one way to how stringent. For example, for BPL, at some point there was the 13 criteria. It has a score of 1 to 4, 0 to 4, and it was overall you could get 52. But then somebody who was 13 or 14 above that score would receive something. It has its own problem. So I and Sabina, we proposed a counting framework. But ideally, you have to relax those criteria, yeah, because that's the only way to do, right? Because you cannot do universal targeting. Because if you do universal targeting, one may argue it is massively expensive. See, so probably people will benefit, or governments will go for targeted interventions, not universal, right? That means you have to relax those criteria. So if you are saying that they are living at subsistence, if it is possible to identify that subsistence, include that in the criteria so that they come under the social safety. That's the way to progress.
So another one, based on my analysis, I find more people in forward category deprived in certain indicators. For example, social protection is one of them. It's a dimension.
Let's come to that discussion tomorrow because we are talking about the indicators and all these things a bit more tomorrow and the day after. So let's have that conversation. Let me start the technicalities so that we sort of cover the technical bits and let's come back to that. Hold on your question. Do not shy away from your question. Let's come back tomorrow when we talk about this. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
That it is you mentioned that increase in monetary income of the household leads to improvement in material indicators in most of the cases, and there is some divergence.
Yeah.
But then, is there any study which suggests that there vice versa is also true? That improvement in your material indicators leads to your increase
What
in
are you?
income.
Give me some examples. What the material indicators you have in mind?
So same as which are used by UNDP for
No, you
MP
just give me some examples. Forget about what UNDP does. You give me some examples.
Like for example, cooking fuel. If the household is using LPG as a cooking fuel, does that lead to increase in his household's income?
What
Is it?
What do you think?
I mean, I don't have any conclusive answer to this.
It all depends on the situation.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean,
you have to understand the mechanisms. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
My question is: are there any studies who can point out this as well?
may not. I do not know. It's an empirical question.
Yeah.
It depends on the situation.
And if hypothetically, if we have a household which is deprived in all the 10 indicators,
Yeah.
and then from external sources we give all these 10 indicators to the household so that it is non-deprived in all the 10 indicators, then does it lead to like improvement in household's income?
Let's look at first of all the methodology. Let's go to the methodological need a bit.
Okay.
What you are asking, that empirical question, you need to go with the data. So I cannot just give you and you use the word hypothetical. I do not like giving hypothetical answers. Okay, it has to be real, it has to be validated with the data. But let me go through the things. Last question for now, then I will come back and take later.
Short of time, I'll ask tomorrow morning.
Yeah, let's ask tomorrow morning because we are continuing. I'll be teaching today as well as the entire tomorrow. So plenty of time for questions. Don't worry. Yep. Let's go ahead for the rest of the time. How much time we have? Half an hour? But I will take 10 minutes more if you don't mind. Yeah. So let's go ahead and talk about the preliminaries so that now let's move to the conceptual bit. So probably you have to take notes and writing because then, we'll be building on that in the afternoon as well as tomorrow. Yeah. So let's try to focus on some of them. Will go quicker, but in multidimensional context, you need to pay attention on some of those because they are slightly different from the monetary world. Yeah. So what we will do, in the framework, we are just going to denote the achievement, that means performance of the person in one particular dimension, by this term xnd. Now earlier we had just xn, right? Because we had just one dimension. Here we have d dimension. Yeah. So xnd is the achievement of the nth person in the dth dimension. That's like it. Yeah, where n runs from 1 to capital N, small d runs from 1 to capital D, and the performance, the achievement of all the people or the household, however our unit of analysis is going to be just summarized by something called a matrix. We used a vector earlier. Now we will be using a matrix. You all know what matrix is, right? Okay. So this is how they are going to look like. A typical data set, right? So we are going to be denoting it by capital X. So you have x11. These ones are dimensions, so d dimensions, and these one are individual. So these, if you look in terms of stata, use stata data, rows, observations. You saw with Pratap yesterday, right? And these will be your variable names. Yeah, so these are different dimensions. This is how the data is summarized. Now, once you have the data, whether you use a stata, whether you use the MATLAB, whether you use your Python, it doesn't matter. You can use any software to compute, but ideally, this is how data look like. Yeah. Okay. Now, the achievement vector of a person generally would have the achievements in d different dimensions. So this will be the vector of achievement of person 1. This is the vector of achievement for person 2, and so on. And when we summarize the achievements of the entire dimension, this will be the vector of all achievements in dimension 1, vector of all achievements in dimension 2, and so on. Yeah? So when we say personal vector, a vector of a person, we will denote the rows. Where we will be denoting the achievement of in an entire dimension is the column. If I refer to column, it should go in your mind, I'm referring to one dimension. Row, I'm referring to E4. Yeah? Okay. Now, we had a poverty line. You have to see the screen over there. So I'm trying to show it here. Where is my, yeah, there is a cursor. So if you see now, we have a deprivation cutoff vector. Okay. So we have this vector now, not a scalar anymore. For each indicator or for each dimension, we have a deprivation cutoff. So now it is a vector itself. Yeah. So this is how typically they look like. So here I have just presented 4 indicators for 4 people. There you go. So here is your income. You have values of income, years of education, whether you have improved sanitation or not, whether you have electricity or not. So you can see different type of. So here you have a ratio scale variable. Here you have a count variable. Here you have a binary variable, so you can have different types of variables, but this is what you get in general. Sounds good? Okay, so let's now move on to what we do in multidimensional measurement. What are the steps? So just like in the single dimensional case, we had identification and aggregation, right? We also have identification before aggregation, but in the multidimensional context, there are 2 different types of identification. Yeah. One is called the censored achievement approach, and the other one is called aggregate achievement approach. I will come to those later. Yeah. For the censored achievement approach, you first censor each indicator with respect to the deprivation cutoff, and then you identify the 4. For aggregation approach, you just aggregate everything that you have with an aggregation function, and you get an overall well-being score, and then you identify who is poor or not. But these 2 different things get different results. You have an exercise. I have given you an exercise on that. Please try to solve and see yourself how these 2 approaches identify 2 different group of people. We will talk about the benefits and so on. BPL approach that we talked about fall in this aggregate achievement approach because you get people's scores, add them up to get an overall score that ranges between 0 to 15, and then you say if you have a score of 13 or more or 15 or more, you will identify the score. Instead of first identifying people's depravity, it is possible that somebody has a lot of land, may not be agricultural land, but that person gets a lot of high score. So although he has low score in other deprivation, that high score is taking him out of poverty. It comes to exactly your world that they have a lot of deprivation just based on one criteria. How can you just take this? That falls in this aggregate achievement approach criteria. Yeah. And then of course, the second one is aggregation. That means you have this information. How do you aggregate these to come up with a number to say how much poverty is there in the society? Yeah. Now, what is censored achievement approach? First, you determine whether individual or whether individuals are deprived in each dimension or each indicator or not. So you have a deprived for income, you have a deprivation cutoff. For education, you have a deprivation cutoff. For other indicators, you have the first step, you identify, are you deprived or not? If you are deprived, I say, yes, you are deprived in this indicator versus you are not deprived in this indicator. And then you identify if someone is poor based on an identification function. And typically, they are either union or intersection or intermediate. So for union, what you say, if you are deprived in any indicator, suppose you are following a human rights based approach. So your indicators, 5 indicators reflect 5 human rights. Now you'd say a person must not be deprived in any of these indicators because it's a matter of human rights and they must have all the rights. You would follow something called a union approach. You will say, I am going to identify somebody as human rights poor if the person is deprived in any of those indicators. A stringent condition is called union approach. So you are taking the union of all deprivations. Then you can have, as you were saying, suppose you have 10 indicators, you are deprived in 10. Somebody might say, suppose I have these 3 or 4 indicators, I identify somebody as poor only if they are deprived in all 4 indicators. Otherwise, they are not poor. It depends on your situation. I cannot give you a hypothetical answer when you should do. Human rights is a very good example why you should follow union approach. Yeah. Then that would be an intersection approach where you are saying you will be poor only if you are deprived in all indicators or dimensions at the same time. Or you get the intermediate approach, which is somewhere in the middle. I will come and give you examples hopefully tomorrow or maybe in the next session. We'll see when it comes. Aggregate achievement approach, what it does, you have the person's achievement in different dimensions. You just simply aggregate them with an aggregate function. Because assumption integration is called, we are economists, we are very good at aggregating. We just use CS function, Costa plus function, no matter what commodities are, whatever, we aggregate them and get a final number. We love this game, yeah? So a person is identified as poor if the aggregate achievement falls below an aggregate poverty line. This is the example I gave you. It's in your exercise. Please try to solve it, yeah, in the evening. The consumer expenditure approach could be seen as an aggregation approach. You do not care whether somebody has insufficient nutrition, insufficient magnesium, insufficient zinc, insufficient protein. You do not look at that. You just aggregate everything to come up with an aggregate consumption expenditure. You have an aggregate poverty line. So if somebody cannot eat vegetables, cannot eat fruits, for you it doesn't matter because nutrients do not matter. It's only aggregate. Whether you are spending that money on alcohol or your shoes, but you cannot eat properly, your children cannot eat properly, it doesn't matter. Your per capita expenditure is above the poverty line, you're not poor. That's the aggregate approach. Sounds good? Makes sense?
This is only income poverty.
No, but you can see consumption expenditure poverty if you look at different nutrients at different indicators. Suppose you are thinking in terms of health poverty. Yeah. Of course, in health, the health experts here can say it is important not just about overall nutrition. Nutrients are important. Even in FAO would say, that nutrients are important. That's why actually they have revised some of their methodologies in health, right? They just do not look at total health expenditure. They look at the components that you are using. If you use those components supposed to generate an index, how much you are consuming nutrition, you are nutrition deprived, and so on. If you use an aggregate, you aggregate all the things. Although you are nutrition deprived, suppose you take enough carbohydrate so that it takes your overall expenditure up. So you can think of this as a multidimensional tool if you're applying that from that point of view. Does it make sense? Martin Ravelin, for example, argues that, consumption expenditure approach is the multidimensional approach because we are aggregating different commodities. Shoes are not same as rice.
All are given similar weights.
Price is their weight, right? But however you do, you use price as weight or you come up with your own weight and so on. The idea is that you aggregate everything, you get an aggregate score. It does not matter whether the person is deprived in some indicators or not. You identify them as poor only if their aggregate falls below that threshold. That means you allow the substitutions. So that means you are compensating, you are allowing compensation of people's deprivation in one dimension by non-deprivation from another dimension. That's what aggregate achievement approach is all about. But this is also used. Sensor one, you are saying, okay, are you deprived in nutrients? I identify, yes, you have deprivation in nutrients. Do you have deprivation in protein? Yes, I do. Do you have deprivation in carbohydrate? No, that's fine. but I know at least you have 2 deprivations out of 3, right? I could say you are deprived, you are poor. If you are deprived, here, just remember the word deprived and poverty are different. Deprivation means in particular indicator, poverty means overall. So I could say if you have 2 out of 3 deprivations, you are poor. You are nutrient deprived, you are protein deprived. It does not matter you are carbohydrate non-deprived or not. I will identify you as poor. An aggregate achievement approach will say that somebody is eating a lot of rice. I mean, the olden days, some political parties would win an election if they would go to a village. It's an example from Bengal. If you just go to the village and tell these people, we will let you eat rice today, they will give you all the votes. Rice, can you imagine? So rice, the cereal, people, those were the times people could survive, had to survive on rice. Famines, for example. Sorry?
They are supposed to.
Makes sense. Situation changed. But that's the idea. But even if you do chicken and rice does not meet the deficiencies of other nutrients. Vegetables, pulse, they are important. Yeah. Now, yeah. So that's the idea. So aggregate achievement approach will allow that kind of compensation. Censored achievement approach will not. Censored achievement will say if you are not deprived, you are not deprived. I'm not going to allow that to compensate your deprivation in other indicators.
Deprivation score, the uniform deprivation score.
Depends on the indicator because in achievement approach, aggregate you are adding income, education, other things, you are clubbing everything together. So it's very difficult. So that's why we never propose an aggregate achievement approach. Yeah, we go. So counting approach that we'll be discussing is the censored achievement approach. So aggregate achievement approach has its own flaw. And so I and Sabina, we wrote a paper, it's on BPL targeting. Yeah, it's published in, I guess, we wrote that part in PW 2013 or something like that. Yeah. So there we talk about why a censored achievement approach is better than an aggregate achievement approach. Because you do not allow in poverty, that kind of compensation is not good. Yeah.
So when we are following this aggregate achievement approach and we are adopting to form some indexes like health or education.
Louder, please.
So when we are adopting the
Aggregate achievement approach,
and we want to form some index, be it in form of related to health or education like that. So how we are going to like achieve the uniformity, like when it comes to the domain of health?
Just like in HDI, people normalize. Suppose you normalize so that they all lie between 0 and 1. So that so chapter 6 of the book, the multidimensional poverty, has this kind of discussions how you normalize. Yeah. So people use different approaches, but they are not perfect. You will find flaws in them. And that's why robustness and all these things taking they become good. But anyhow, I'm not a big fan of aggregate achievement approach. So but some people may try to come and may justify the preference-based approach to poverty measurement and so on. But I'm not a very big fan of the aggregate achievement approach. Yeah. Anyways, moving on. So now the next step, the aggregation step, just construct an index of poverty summarizing the information of the poor. Whatever you get from this first step, you get those information and then you construct your poverty measure. Now that can differ from approach to approach. We will talk about in the evening, in the afternoon session. So we are going to denote a multidimensional poverty measure by PX. Yeah, this is going to be our multidimensional poverty measure. How am I doing with time? 15 minutes. Okay. Anyway, some of them will go quicker. Symmetry. You remember what symmetry is? Yeah. So you have these people, you just swap each other's profiles. Here is profile now because you have multiple, right? So here you have these rows of people, right? So you just swap each other. So if you have this kind of situation, it should not matter for poverty measurement. It's the profiles that matter. It doesn't matter who has what. Yeah. Okay. Replication invariance against the idea population. If you just have that particular group of people, you just replicate them, their deprivation profiles or the achievement profiles. It's not going to make any difference in poverty measurement. Scale invariance. Again, what it does, it's more related to change of unit of measurement. So suppose you have, this is measured in rupees, this is measured in years of education, and this is suppose BMI as unit of measurement. You just change the unit of measurement. You express this one in say dollar. You express this one as months of education than years of education. You express this as BMI, you just change the unit so that just in data, instead of 18.5, you express them as 81580. If you just change these scales, idea is the new poverty measurement should not change, which makes sense, right? Yeah. Now, in multidimensional measurement, things are not always that easy. There is something, you always may need to change sometimes the transformation of the variables. Yeah. So what if you had to square certain variables? Taking log of incomes is very common, right? Logarithm of incomes and so on. So if you change the scale of the variables, you take square for something, logarithm for something, square root for something. Scaling variance, it will not remain scaling variance anymore because you are scaling, you are multiplying with something. So the ordinality property requires, and that is one of the basis for counting approach. Yeah, is that if you change the scale this way, and you have to change the monotonic transformation, you have to do it for the poverty cutoffs as well. Poverty measurement should not change. And we will discuss this leads to that justifies the use of the counting approach, the MPI framework, where you convert things to 0, 1. Okay? Because you can have this kind of situation in practice, in your work, yeah? It should not matter then. That's called ordinality. And we will see many measures, they do not satisfy ordinality. Some measures do, that we will be discussing more today. Yeah? Now, what was photovaccine again? You remember? So increase in the non-force income in income world should not affect poverty valuation, right? Okay. In multidimensional context, you have two different types of situation. Yeah. First one, it says poverty focus. Poverty focus, it says if y is obtained from x by an increment, that means increase in achievement, to a non-poor person's achievement, the deprivation cutoff vector remains unchanged, they're exactly the way they are, then your poverty should not change. So the focus is on non-poor. And this one links to aggregate achievement approach. I will explain why in a bit. I will show you another one and then I will show. So this one is, so you are aggregating, right? You are aggregating everybody's achievement and you are identifying somebody is poor or not, right? So if you have any increment in a poor person's achievement, any of their achievement, this is analogous to what we observe in the single dimensional context. You have any change, any increase in the achievement of a non-poor person's achievement profile, no change in poverty. But then there is a second type to focus problem. It says if y is obtained from x by an increment in achievement in non-deprived dimension, there should not be change in poverty. Now, what is the subtle difference? We were just discussing the example of BPL, right? In BPL, what you do, BPL has 13 different questions. And in each question, you could score 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, depending on your situation. And the maximum possible score is 13 times 4 is 52. Minimum possible score is 0. If somebody is, say, scoring 13 or 15 or more, the person is identified as poor, right? Now, consider a person who is poor. Yeah, so has a score above 15, 16 or whatever. Yeah. Now that person's achievement in a non-deprived dimension can change, and the person can go out of poverty. Or on the contrary, it is possible that a person is non-poor. So Again, come back to this particular example in the BPL. So you have a poor person. Yeah. For that poor person, suppose that poor person has a non-deprived dimension, and you have an increase in that non-deprived dimension. That changes the score. That person become non-poor, right? Because in BPL you are aggregating the overall number, right? Deprivation focus would prevent that. Deprivation focus is saying if you have any change in your deprived dimension, non-deprived dimension, whether you are poor or not, it should not change the poverty profile. So this does not go with aggregate achievement approach, it goes with the censored achievement approach. Because you are saying, if I have identified you as non-deprived in one dimension, even if you are poor, it is possible that a poor person, let me write this example, maybe it will be clearer for you. 9 years of school, deprivation cutoff is 6, and suppose you have a BMI of 17 and the cutoff is 13.5. So which dimension? So this is income, this is education, and this is health. In which dimension is the person deprived? Income deprived, health deprived, non-deprived, right? So if that person's income, let's see the different color. If this person's income, education goes from 9 to 11 years for some reason, he took evening studies or whatever, after day schools or whatever. Should that get the person out of poverty? Who would say it should get the person out of poverty? Please raise your hand. Who thinks the person should go out of poverty because of increase in education? Who thinks the person should not go out of poverty? Many of you, right? So that means what you are doing, you are saying, you know what? The deprivation profile is deprived, not deprived, and deprived. Agreed? If you have any change in here, that should not affect poverty, irrespective of whether you are identified as poor or not poor. So increment in a non-deprived indicator should not affect poverty. That's called deprivation focus. Poverty focus, on the other hand, says, suppose you somehow aggregate this number with an aggregation function, and you aggregate and get a number of 25. Who knows how you get it? Some aggregation function. Yeah? And suppose your poverty cutoff was, 26. So you are poor, right? But if you increase 9/11, this one can go up to say 27. So you become non-poor. This censored achievement approach will prevent that. So poverty cutoff will say, if you are non-poor, only then, if you have an increment, it doesn't matter. Deprivation focus is slightly stronger. It says, I don't care if you're poor or not. If there is a change in your non-deprived achievement, poverty should not change. You see the subtle difference? Is it clear? Again, you have an exercise for you to go through. I hope it will make it more clear. Okay? But this subtle difference is very important in multidimensional framework. Yeah? Unlike in single dimensional framework. Okay. Monotonicity. Can anyone remind me? Monotonicity? What is that? Sorry? Increase in a poor person's income, it reduces poverty. You don't have to go to non-poor section. Increase a poor person's income in income world, it reduces, right? Yes. Societal poverty. Same thing, an increment in a poor person's deprived achievement, a poor person should reduce poverty. Done. Okay. Then you have also the idea of dimensional monotonicity. Yeah. The idea of dimensional monotonicity is that because we can have binary variables here, right? Binary variables, either yes or no. So you cannot have a situation where, say, a person has electricity or not. If a person does not have electricity, you do not have any way of knowing there's an improvement in electricity. So you can either have a non-deprivation in that indicator or not. That is called dimensional monotonicity. So that means if a y is obtained from x by an increment in a deprived achievement of a core. So if a core is facing, suppose here you have the 17, okay? If this one goes to 19, then this poor person becomes non-poor, right? So if a poor person becomes non-poor in a particular dimension, then poverty should go down. Because this is valid because many of our indicators you will see are going to be 0-1 indicators. Where you cannot have, like income, you can have increment. But for 0-1 indicators, either yes or no. So you just move there instead of any increment among the four. Yep.
So, monotonicity and dimensional of tonicity, what is the difference?
Here you can see, so this person, is this person deprived in this dimension? Yes. Is this person still deprived in this dimension? So monotonicity says if a poor person's achievement in one dimension increases, even if the person remains poor, you should have change. You should have reduction in poverty, right? Dimensional monotonicity says if that person becomes poor person becomes non-deprived. Because as I said, many of our indicators are 0-1 indicators. This is what it is. So if you become non-deprived, so poor person becomes non-deprived, then yeah, because this kind of increment may not be possible for binary indicators. You either become deprived or become non-deprived. If that happens, that's what dimensional monotonicity. You'll see dimensional monotonicity becomes more prevalent whenever using the deprivation counts. Yeah, that's what this property is about. Now, this one is the extension of the transfer principle. You remember the transfer principle? That means you take the money from the rich, give to the poor, or take the money from the poor, give to the rich. Yeah? That transfer will keep the total achievement unchanged, but the change in the distribution, right? There is a concept, technical, called uniform majorization. Yeah? So for example, if you multiply this achievement matrix by this one, what does this one do? This one, if you multiply, so if you're multiplying the first with this one, if you multiply, that means you are equalizing 0.5, half and half, right? Look, you are equalizing 4 and 3 to get 3.5 and 3.5. So you are equalizing the achievement among the poor, right? Look at this dimension across three people. Look at this vector across three people. It was 4, 3, and 8, right? It has become 3.5, 3.5, and 8. Did total amount change? If you take 4 plus 3 plus 8, how much do you get? 15. If you get 3.5, 3.5, 18, 15. So total has remained changed, but which one is more equal and which one is more unequal? This one is more equal, right? Look, similarly, if you have done the second for the second dimension, this is correspond to the second dimension. Again, 0.5, 0.50, 4, 5, 6. Look, 4 and 5 has become, this one should be, it should be 4.5 and 4.5. Yeah, this is the mistake. Yeah, so this should be 4.5 and 4.5 equal and 6. Yeah, so please change. I will change this to 4.5. Similarly, you have to. Similarly, this one you left it as 0, 0, and 1. Yeah. So anyway, so this is how you see how they are going to be working like this. Yeah. So if you multiply, so the main idea of this is that once you are reducing inequality, if the distribution among the poor becomes more equal, that should be conducive to poverty. Then poverty should go down. It's the same idea as transfer principle. Yeah. So this is the uniform majorization. The transfer principle says if y is obtained from x by uniform majorization among the poor, that is an averaging of achievements among the poor, then y should be conducive to poverty, poverty should go down. And weak transfer says, you know what, if y is obtained from x by this uniform majorization, then it will either go down or remain same. And you will often notice when you are reading papers on multidimensional poverty, you will often see people are using the term weak transfer. The only difference between weak transfer and transfer is that one is strict and one is less than equal, not strict. So this one will say poverty will, so in terms of words, how you play like lawyer, this one says poverty should be lower. This one says poverty should not increase. Poverty should be lower. Poverty should not increase. So be very mindful because this is something often people get confused. Poverty will go down versus poverty will not increase. They're not the same thing. What is missing is the equality sign. Make sense? So poverty should not increase minus poverty should not, when poverty should remain changed, gives you poverty should decrease. Okay?
I understand this bistochastic matrix.
Bistochastic, yeah. Permutation matrix is, you have already seen it. Permutation matrix just changes the row, just jumbles the row. That's permutation. Yeah? Bistochastic matrix, the idea is that it is a matrix whose rows and column sum should be equal to 1. Row sum and the column sum, they're equal to 1. What it does is that if you multiply with it, it just averages the. So, for example, if you had 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, that means you are taking the whole average. These three will be equal. If you have 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, for example, so if you have 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, you will just take average and give everything same amount to everybody. So, bistochastic matrix is an idea of averaging. Yeah, so if you have 1/3 and 2/3, that means you are assigning 1/3 to the first, 2/3 to the second, you take the average. However it becomes.
So, sir, this matrix you take it could be any other.
Yeah. It could be anything.
Could be
1/3, 1/3, 1/3. Yeah, as long as the row sum and the column sum, they all are equal to 1. Perfect. So any sorts of averaging of achievements among the poor should reduce. So again, coming from Saint's idea of egalitarianism, this is not prioritarianism. I would rather prefer prioritarianism, but this is from the concept of egalitarianism. It is saying if you have a distribution, more unequal distribution even among the poor, with overall being the same, should be conducive to poverty. Less poverty. It will be, if you have more unequal among the poor, that means it will be less poverty, societal poverty. Does it make sense? That's what it is. Yeah. Yeah.
Transfer and weak transfer concept is somewhere linking to our microeconomics, weak axiom and strong axiom. Is it
Strong?
strong axiom?
What is strong axiom? Give me an example.
I am taking into aspect of if you are preparing one conjunction bundle of continuity, then you will be prepared to that any condition you are not going to change of other bundles, even that other
Are you talking about
bundles.
strict preference and weak preference?
It's,
Yes. Strict and weak. So weak means when you write strict, this is the symbol you use. So when you write strict preference in economics, you use this. When you do weak, you do this, right? Greater than equal. This is exactly what it is. Yeah? That means they could be equal as well. These two commodity bundles could be preferred equally as well. That's the idea.
weak transfer is giving more liberty compared to our transfer.
Not liberty. Weak is saying is just again play of word by theoretician. You are saying no, poverty must go down because of transfer. And they are saying no, poverty should not increase because of transfer. So they are saying literally poverty can remain the same. That means it is insensitive to transfer. Yeah? But they are saying Yeah, why poverty should not, but it should not increase. It's important on its own. Yeah. Okay, now let's talk a bit. Well, we are almost towards the end. I know we have run out of time, but let me take 5 minutes. I'll try to finish. Yeah. The distinction between marginal and joint distribution is very important in multidimensional measurement. Yeah. Have you heard about the marginal distribution and joint distribution in econometrics? Yeah. Okay. So if you look at one column at a time, forget about the other columns. That's marginal distribution. So you are just focusing on one particular distribution, irrespective of other distribution. This is called marginal distribution of the income, marginal distribution of education, marginal distribution. Now, given a joint distribution, can you obtain a marginal distribution? How do you do that? Mathematically integrate. Basically, integrate it out. Now, if you have two joint distributions, how many? Sorry, if you have two marginal distributions, how many joint distributions can you create? If you have a joint distribution, you can integrate it out. If I give you two marginal distributions, how many joint distributions can you create? No, infinite. It will depend on how much correlation you insert between two dimensions. They could be negatively correlated, they could be positively correlated, they could be independent. That is done through a technique called copula in statistics. You can insert, you can throw the association, and then you will get the joint distribution. Okay, just for your information. But you generally what you get here, joint distribution. This is a joint distribution because you have joint performance, but these are marginal, marginal of 1, marginal 2, marginal 3, and so on. Yeah. So here is an example. You have 1, 2, 3, you have 2, 4, 6, 3, 5, 7. Let's look this red dimension independent of these two. We have 1, 2, 3, and 1, 3, 2. Are they different? By permutation? They are not. They're exactly the same.
But metrics, they are not same.
I didn't talk about matrix yet. Let's focus on marginal. 2, 4, 6, 6, 4, 2. Exactly the same. 3, 5, 7, 7, 3, 5. Same. Joint distribution. Are the matrix same? Two matrices are the same. They're different, right? So they are same marginal, but different joint distribution. Now you are sitting there, why are you talking about this thing? Why is it important? Okay, let's go to the next slide. So suppose the deprivation cutoff is just 2, 4, and 5. Yeah? How the deprivation profiles look like? This is how the deprivation profiles will look like. Agree? Yeah? So if this is one society, in this particular society, and compare this particular society, so suppose you have these sustainable development goals. This is goal 1, and I ask, what fraction of population is deprived in red SDG? Here, 1/3. What fraction of population deprived? 1/3. What fraction of population deprived in black SDG? What fraction of population deprived? Okay. Now, here, the first person, what fraction of overall deprivation this person is facing?
1/9. Same. 1/9.
So, only the first person is facing all deprivations in this society. So overall deprivation profile, if you just look at different sustainable, suppose these are 3 different sustainable development goals, you are saying, oh, these two societies are identical because they have 1/3 deprivations in each indicator. What if we look at them? Was there a miss? Okay. So if you look them as separately, you will see societies are exactly the same because 1/3 deprivation in red, 1/3 in black, 1/3 in blue. Same in this society, right? But if you look at jointly, here deprivation is much more shared among different people. Here, one person is standing out and sharing the burden of all deprivations. Which society is more unequal? First one is money. That's the need for looking at deprivations together. That's why joint distributions are important. Okay? That's why we do multidimensional. When you do multidimensional property, if we don't look at the joint distribution, there is no point in doing multidimensional analysis. Does it make sense? Great. So, what are the properties? So, this comes from the well-being analysis. So, one form of inequality, if you look at single dimension, we just look at the transfer, right? And I presented that kind of transfer in multidimensional form. That's one form of inequality. But in the multidimensional context, there are two different forms of inequality. Second inequality comes from the association between dimensions. The second form of inequality relates to the joint distribution. I prefer to use the term association because correlation, one particular form of association. So correlation is a linear measure of association and often gives misleading results. So I use the term association. I like it better than correlation. Correlation is just one form of association. Often, especially for binary and categorical variables, gives a completely nonsense result. So should not be used. Yeah. So again, I'm not going through the example, but let's look at this example. So again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 3, 5, 7. Look at the association. They are perfectly positively associated, right? They are all rank order. This person has lowest in all, second lowest in all, and third lowest in all. They're perfectly ordered, right? If you move from here to this kind of distribution, you are saying this is association decreasing rearrangement. So you are reducing. So this is called one is, so if you move from x2 to x1, this one to this one, this is association increasing rearrangement. If you move from this one to that one, this is called association decreasing rearrangement. If you go, so which society you would consider more unequal? This one or that one? First one. So you are saying higher association is bad. Think of a situation in a country where you do not have any public provision of health or education. A person who has higher income can buy more health, more education. A person who is in the middle income can buy moderate education, moderate health. Poor person cannot buy anything, neither by education or health. So education and health, they'll be perfectly correlated. Is it bad or good? But if in a society, say a socialist country where education and health are they're given free, in many countries up until 18 years of age, education is free. If you go to Scandinavian countries, up until PhD is free. You do not have to pay anything. Yeah. There, it is not necessary that richer person, they have been able to access education and health. Education and health is everybody. So the correlation will be much lower. So higher correlation in a sense could be seen bad. So correlation, so in multidimensional context, you have one form of inequality, which is inequality between or within each dimension. But then you have another form of inequality, which comes because of the correlation between dimensions. How highly associated they are. Does it make sense?
Association is bad for equality.
In this case, depending on, of course, the relationship between dimensions, I'm not going that far because that's another kind of debate. But you can see that one person has more of everything, another person's less of everything. Would you consider that as good for inequality or bad for inequality? That's what it is. So high correlation looks like it's kind of a bad thing. This is what you'll also see in multidimensional problem. Does it make sense? These two forms of conceptually? Yeah. Does anyone ask question? Any? Yeah. Okay. So again, you have these relationship between dimensions, and I'm not going that too far. Some people say, okay, most of the time, dimensions are kind of substitutes. Okay, and the concept of substitute and complement, by the way, is very different how you have learned. I will try to go, but not too far. Yeah. So when things are substitutes, then say high correlation is bad. But when dimensions are complements, high correlation is good. What are the example of complement? Left shoe and right shoe. If dimensions are like that, that means you cannot enjoy one dimension without the other. They're complement, right? Now, dimensions actually have both properties. If you look at very low level, if you have bad health, you cannot go to school and get education. So they have more complementary relationship. At the higher level, well, if you are sick, but you have money, at least you can compensate. So it's very difficult for me to theoretically tell you exactly what relationship versus. But most of the time, people try to justify, yes, some form of compensation is there between dimensions. Okay? If you believe that, if you accept that as logically or make it an assumption, then high correlation is bad. If you try to argue, no, this is my situation where I need the other thing to get this thing. Yeah. Good health is important for a child to attend school. Then it is more complementary relationship. It's a very complicated area. Theoretically, I'm not going there. I can spend another lecture, another 2 hours on this issue. I'm not going there. And there are two different forms of idea of complementarity and substitute. They give you different relation. What you have learned probably, substitute, perfect substitute, that means like you have utility function which is linear. Or if you have Leon TF, yeah. The idea of substitute and complement in welfare world is very different. It is determined by the cross partial derivative of utility. So the sign of this term del 2 u over del x1 del x2, the sign of it determines whether something is substitute or complement. The definition that you have learned comes from cross price elasticity. So that means you have to have a price. Now, what is the price of education? What is the price of health? So in that world, it will define whether your marginal utility from a commodity increases with the consumption of a second commodity, then that will be complement. Otherwise, it will be substitute. And they give you, even if you take the simple CES utility function, they give you different restrictions. The restrictions do not match. For the first time, when I found that out, I felt like a fool. Why am I getting this substitute? Because we are so used to calling, oh, whenever you have a linear utility function and linear equation, that's perfect substitute. That doesn't work here. That is the definition of independent in this world. Okay, again, I'm not going all these technical things because again, it will be just for another 2 hours lecture. We need to finish for now. Yeah. So, so that's what it is. More, we will be just looking at, we'll be just assuming more correlation as bad. Yeah, because must be assume that dimensions are kind of neither substitute nor complement in that sense. Anyway, the final ones are subgroup consistency. You already know what it is. Subgroup decomposability, same thing. We have gone through it. I'm not delving deeper in here. What is an important aspect in multidimensional context is something called dimensional breakdown. So that overall poverty can be presented as weighted sum of deprivations in different dimensions. If you can do that, the good thing is that you can try to argue what is the contribution of this dimension to overall poverty. What is the contribution of another dimension to overall poverty? Okay, so you can either decompose across population. That means total poverty is a population weighted sum of poverty within subgroup, or you could say that overall poverty is just kind of a weighted sum of deprivation in different indicators. So we will then, when we come to different poverty measures, we will see what kind of properties they satisfy.
So in the beginning, we had this aggregation approach or measuring poverty needs. So
this one is just saying now an aggregate poverty aggregation approach can satisfy or cannot satisfy. A sensor achievement approach either can satisfy, not satisfy. It is not necessary that either of them will satisfy this property. This one is saying that if you take a poverty measure, if the poverty measure can be expressed in this form, it requires strong assumptions. then it allows you to understand the contribution of different indicators to overall property. But not many academics like these properties. Not many academics think that this is important, but they are policy relevance. There is always because you have to lose certain things. If you bring dimensional breakdown, you lose certain aspect as well. Sometimes people miss it. These are dimensions. These are dimensional deprivations. We do not call it poverty anymore. This is say for education deprivation, health deprivation, and so on. So you can express them as dimensional deprivation, but overall poverty is the weighted sum. But each property, when you bring, you sacrifice something. You give up something. So there is no free lunch. And there is no sort of, you cannot just betterment over everything. You bring every aspect, you lose something. And that's very important for you all to learn. You can choose a methodology because everybody is using very popular, but you have to understand you are losing something.
Here, for example, what can you see?
I will come.
This makes.
I will come to that. Don't worry, I'm not running away. You have another 2 hours in the afternoon. We'll be talking about different methodologies, and then we will go deeper into a particular methodology, counting effort, tomorrow, and you will see all the relevance tomorrow. You should be able to see. Yeah? And then if you have further question, exactly technicalities, what we are using, happy to. But let's go step by step. Even if I say you will not be able to follow at this moment because I have not covered certain things. Let me finish those. Hold on to your questions, I'll come back. Sorry, we go overboard by how many? Half an hour? 20 minutes. There you go. When I start talking, I cannot stop. What can I do? It's a vice of mine. Was it clear? Did it make sense? Yes. Did you learn something new? Yes. Yeah? Okay. So we'll continue in the afternoon. Sounds good? Yes.